What's up, guys? We are continuing our series dissecting T.S. Eliot's brilliant poem, The Dry Salvages. Last video, we did section 1, and now we're going to be doing section 2 in this video. Before we get into that, I want to give a little brief history of time. I think I made a mistake in my first video that I didn't explain all the different forms of time, and I think that was a big mistake. I think I made the assumption that, well, only my Gebser loyalists will watch this, and to a certain extent that is true, but you don't want only just Gebser loyalists. You have to have the uninitiated in here as well. So I'm going to give you a very brief history of time, and then we're going to get right into it. So ever since the beginning of this consciousness game that's been played, we'll say somewhere between 70,000 and 30,000 BC, up until about 10,000 BC, man was timeless. There was simply no conception of time. Not cyclical, not linear, not quality, not rhythm, not meter. There is no conception of time, and you can tell if you go back and you examine all those rituals back in the day. Again, there's no space, there's no time, there's no ego. So for a long time, man was timeless. Then, with the agricultural revolution, or more specifically, the birth of the mythical consciousness structure, time suddenly became a thing, and not only did it become a thing, it had a certain rhythm to it, as a certain cycle, a certain progression, and that progression is as follows. In a 2D flat circle, it begins where it ends and ends where it begins. This is why when you look at the Bhagavad Gita and all these old ancient texts from 10,000 BC up until, we'll say the Renaissance generally, you find the emphasis on cycles, whether it be the cycles of the 4 seasons, whether it be the cycles of breathing, right? I'm breathing, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. There's an emphasis on polarity. Now, to give a real-life example of this, you can still see this today. Take gun violence, right? Take gun violence in a city like Baltimore or Detroit. Well, how does it always start, right? It begins where it ends, which is to say someone shooting another. So if you hook up with my girl, that's going to hurt my ego. Now I have to kill you. So I ended it, right, by killing you and shooting you dead. But really, I didn't really end, did I? I began something else. I began the cycle of violence. So of course someone else is going to say, all right, Justin, well, you killed my friend, now I'm going to kill yours. I'm going to end it. Of course you didn't actually end it. You began something else. This is the idea of the beginning, ending where it begins and beginning where it ends. If you've seen the movie Inside Llewyn Davis, perfect example. I mean, what a great example of that in action. So that is mythical time. 2D flat circle, right? Just circle. Just like the seasons. First summer, first spring, then summer, then fall, then winter, then spring, then summer. You just keep going. Then, as mentioned in the last video, we have rational time, which is essentially spatial time. Rationality was born from the preceding discovery of objectified space, or perspectivity. And so we would expect to find space emphasized in this conception of time, and we do. We have the time units, in which each is partitioned and separated from other time units, so it's 10:22 p.m., not 10:23, not 10:21. Everything is linear, where it's one after the other, right? The one in the present moment is causally connected to the moment that preceded it, and causally connected to the moment that will proceed it. And then, of course, we also have directionality. So directions, we have future, which is forward directed, and past, which is directed backwards. And of course, in this, we have the little triangle. Now, if you follow my co-rationals in my Gebser series, you know how important the triangle is to rational thought. I'm not going to get into it here because it would slow it down. So we have past, future, and the present is this little point of synthesis, or this point of reconciliation. Now, the problem with past and future as temporal directions is that the present becomes this liminal space, this liminal medium, in which the future can be calculated and the past can be considered. So rather than being in the present, which phenomenologically is perpetual, you are focused on the future or the past. But the problem is, you're not really focused on the future, are you? You're focused on the image of the future that you've conjured up in your head, and now you're treating as real. You're treating as more real as reality. You have no idea how you're going to react in a future situation. I have no idea how I'm going to react when my mom inevitably dies. So there's no point in me getting all worked up about it and getting all depressed over something you don't even know how you're going to react. Maybe it hits you in a good way, not in a good, obviously, you're not happy your mom died, but maybe you think, wow, I'm actually feeling a spiritual connection rather than just this depressing loss. And the same principle applies to the past. This is a false understanding of time. Rather, transcending this, the better way to understand is what we talked about in the last video, which is rather than time being shaped as a triangle, in which the present becomes this incredibly insignificant liminal medium that just allows you to understand the future and past. No, rather than a triangle, time is a sphere, a 4D sphere, and we are in the center. So rather than the past, as it recedes, therefore its effect is less, and the future, as you keep going further and further, well, it's just this empty space that doesn't affect you. No. It folds in on itself. Past and future folds in on itself and shapes the present. If you truly want to understand the future, you obviously can't understand it by hopping in some time machine, but you can understand the future by understanding how it affects your present. Let me give you an example. Let's say you work in like a restaurant, and let's say you're a server and you get cut by generally around 8, but depending on the situation, it could be 7, it could be 9. So let's say it's 7 or 7:30 and you think, great, I'm going to be cut in 30 minutes. I get to go home and I get to play video games or hang out with my girlfriend or boyfriend. Awesome. Think about what's happening here, right? The past is shaping the present insofar as you have been at work before, you've experienced this before, and you've also experienced being at home with your boyfriend and girlfriend, and you realize, wait, being at home is way better than me slaving away for these people I don't even care about. So the past is shaping your present. It's shaping the anticipation of being cut. And then once you're cut, well, that's the key that unlocks all this awesome stuff. So imagine if I come into the restaurant at 7:30 and I see all these people and they say, no, you're not cut. You're going to keep going until 9 or 10. Now we've got a problem. Now this future that I've created in my mind that I treat as more real than reality itself is shaping the present insofar as now that the desirable future is no longer attainable, at least not in the time span that I wanted, now it shapes the present by making me irritable and angry, right? So the better way of doing this is saying, well, hold on now. I know I'm inevitably going to be cut because that's just the way it works. The restaurant has to close. But I don't know when that's going to come in reality. I don't know how I'm going to react to that in reality. But what I do know is if I have a set time that I've constructed in my mind, this futuristic image, and then reality doesn't meet this set time, that's going to shape my present and make me very, very, very angry now, isn't it? But the problem is not with the restaurant or even time itself. The problem is with you. The problem is with you treated some fictional idea of the future as more real than reality itself. So that's your problem. So rather, the appropriate move would be to say, look, I am excited about getting cut. I know I'm going to be cut, and I know I'm going to be doing more fun things after this. However, that is making me too excited and too anticipated to the point where I can't recognize that me being cut is not guaranteed to happen when, emphasis on the time, I want it to happen. So the real way of understanding the future is not by jumping into some time machine and going into the future and looking back and saying, that's what it is. It's recognizing how the future shapes you. So going forward, you could say, I am excited, but I'm not going to let that affect my present engagement in the world. If I'm cut when I'm cut, right? I'm cut when my manager says, and no matter, I am going to meet that moment in full force. I'm going to be psychologically adept to that moment. I'm not going to let it destroy me based on some ridiculous futuristic image I had. So that's very important. That's time as a sphere. I apologize, but I do feel that was necessary. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this is section 2 of T.S. Eliot's The Dry Salvages. Where is there an end of it, the soundless wailing, the silent withering of autumn flowers, dropping their petals and remaining motionless? Where is there an end to the drifting wreckage, the prayer of the bone on the beach, the unprayable prayer at the calamitous annunciation? I should remind you, the structure of this video, we're going to read through the whole section once, go through it line by line, and then read through it again. The unprayable prayer at the calamitous annunciation. There is no end but addition, the trailing consequence of further days and hours, while emotion takes to itself the emotionless years of living among the breakage of what was believed in as the most reliable, and therefore the fittest for renunciation. There is the final addition, the failing pride or resentment at failing powers, the unattached devotion which might pass for devotionless, in a drifting boat with a slow leakage, the silent listening to the undeniable clamor of the bell of the last annunciation. Where is the end of them, the fisherman sailing into the wind's tail, where the fog cowers? We cannot think of a time that is oceanless, or of an ocean not littered with wastage, or of a future that is not liable, like the past, to have no destination. We have to think of them as forever bailing, setting, and hauling, while the northeast lowers over shallow banks unchanging and erosionless, or drawing their money, drying sails at dockage, not as making a trip that will be unpayable for a hall that will not bear examination. There is no end of it, the voiceless wailing, no end to the withering of withered flowers, to the movement of pain that is painless and motionless, to the drift of the sea and the drifting wreckage, the bone's prayer to death its God, only the hardly, barely prayable prayer of the one Annunciation. It seems, as one becomes older, that the past has another pattern and ceases to be a mere sequence, or even development, the latter a partial fallacy encouraged by superficial notions of evolution, which becomes, in the popular mind, a means of disowning the past. The moments of happiness, not the sense of well-being, fruition, fulfillment, security, or affection, or even a very good dinner, but the sudden illumination. We had the experience but missed the meaning. An approach to the meaning restores the experience in a different form, beyond any meaning we can assign to happiness. I have said before that the past experience is revived and the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but of many generations. Not forgetting something that is probably quite ineffable. The backward look behind the assurance of recorded history, the backward half-look over the shoulder towards the primitive terror. Now we come to discover that the moments of agony, whether or not due to misunderstanding, having hoped for the wrong thing or dreaded the wrong things, is not in question, are likewise permanent. With such permanence as time has, we appreciate this better in the agony of others, nearly experienced, involving ourselves, than our own. For our own past is covered by the currents of action, but the torment of others remains an experience unqualified, unworn by subsequent attrition. People change and smile, but the agony abides. Time the destroyer is time the preserver, like the river with its cargo of dead negroes, cows, and chicken coops, the bitter apple and the bite in the apple. And the ragged rock and the restless waters, waves wash over it, fogs conceal it. On a halcyon day, it is merely a monument. In navigable weather, it is always a sea mark to lay a course by, but in the somber season or the sudden fury, is what it always was. Whew! A lot of good stuff there, huh? All right. So let's just take this line by line. I'm actually going to read from my book because I have a ton of markings in this, and I think that'll help me. So, okay, let's go line by line. Where is there an end of it? The soundless wailing, the silent withering of autumn flowers, dropping their petals and remaining motionless. Where is there an end of it to the drifting wreckage, to the prayer of the bone on the beach, the unprayable prayer at the calamitous Annunciation? So I believe when he says the soundless wailing and the silent withering of autumn flowers, well, as autumn flowers wither, that must happen over time. And I think when he asks where is there an end of it, where is the end of time? Time in a linear sense. So I think he's referencing the end of rational linear time, the 1022, 1023. And then he says, there is no end, but addition, the trailing consequence of further days and hours. Very important. So when he says there is no end, but addition, I think what this is a reference to is the integral irrational idea that time is finite yet unbounded. So time, being the self-contained 4D sphere, doesn't have a neat set beginning and end. All it has is additional moments. And he describes this beautifully as the trailing consequence of further days and hours. Now, there's a couple ways you could read this, actually. You could see this as the addition of time, meaning that, well, as time emerges and as we go through moment to moment in linear time, there's all these trailing consequences of further days and hours. And I think it's interesting when he says further days and hours, it almost has this feeling of there's no qualitative distinction between days and hours, and those days and hours get reduced into measurable linear equality. So that's one way of looking at it, where this idea, well, time is just, it just keeps going, and then you have these trailing consequences, and then you just kind of die. Another way of looking at this is saying the trailing consequence of future days and hours, rather than further days and hours. And I think it's a very cool reading of this line because it totally works with this aperspectival understanding of time, this idea that the past is not necessarily behind you but is present, and the future is not necessarily ahead of you but is present. Well, if that's the case, the trailing consequence of future days and hours makes complete sense, because they're no longer opposites that need to be reconciled, but just aspects that shape the present. And if past and future are present, well, then you have room to play with this and this sort of wordplay of it's trailing in the future, right? That can't happen with this strict divided linear time. So he says, while emotion takes to itself the emotionless years of living among the breakage of what was believed in as the most reliable, and therefore the fittest for renunciation. There is the final edition. So that, to me, obviously references death, right? Time keeps adding, and then you have the final edition. So there's the final edition, the failing pride or resentment at failing powers. So I think what Eliot is suggesting here, in your final moment or moments, when you're on the deathbed, unable to understand time as a sphere and only viewing time as that rational, linear form of time that leaves trailing consequences of further days and hours, where everything just gets reduced into quantitative equality. The problem is that grows a deep, bitter resentment, and then that resentment leads to pride or resentment at failing powers. And the reason why is because you feel like you've wasted your life. It ends anticlimactically. It just keeps going, hey, kind of like the Tracy Lawrence song, time marches on. So if time marches on, and that's your only conception of time, well, unfortunately, you become a blip in that understanding of time. And if that's the case, your life is essentially meaningless. It kind of reminds me of Judge Holden's idea of time, or Paul Valéry's The Ship. This idea that the ship, i.e. the soul or human action, has never left its trace upon the ocean, the world. Because in the same way that the ship is traversing an ocean and it leaves that trail of bubbles, well, what happens? The water just smooths over those bubbles, and sure enough, within 30 seconds, it's as if they didn't exist. This is exactly what Judge Holden was talking about in Blood Meridian. This is a problem. And we're going to talk about why it's a problem. I'm not going to get into it too much because we are going to be... Eliot will explain why it's better. But I think this section, at least this beginning part, is a great poetic expression of the idea that rational time, when employed exclusively, is a killer, almost literally. The unattached devotion, which might pass for devotionless, in a drifting boat with a slow leakage, the silent listening to the undeniable clamor of the bell of the last annunciation. So again, you have this sort of resigned apathy to your death. This is a very non-spiritual death. You don't want to have this kind of death. Gebser died with a fat smile on his face because he understands time, he understands the present, and he understands spirituality. The rationalist does not, and they get the terribleness of this. And that's represented by the drifting boat with a slow leakage. Of course, in the first section of this video, we talked about how the ocean represents the vastness of the external world and eternity, and ships who traverse this sea, traverse this ocean, represents human engagement in the world. So if a drifting boat with a slow leakage, well, that boat's going to sink. It's this sort of accepted resignation. Where is the end of them? The fisherman sailing into the wind's tail. Let me go down here. Where the fog cowers, we cannot think of a time that is oceanless, or of an ocean not littered with wastage, or of a future that is not liable like the past to have no destination. This is time as a sphere. So the idea is you can't really think of a past that didn't shape the present, insofar either as you were thrown into, even if you were the first human being who ever was existing in the world, nonetheless the past is going to shape this present. So take that example. You still have this idea of, you might not understand it, but evolution, right? First there was the monkeys, and then you had us. But even if you were born like I was in 1996, nonetheless, the past is shaping the present, which is to say the ocean is littered with wastage. And wastage in this case means human activity. Obviously, I'm only here because my parents hooked up, and they only did that because they worked at the same place, and yada, yada, yada. Same thing. And then the future, of course, how does he describe it? Or of a future that is not liable like the past to have no destination. So take like drug addiction. That's a good example. So let's say I'm addicted to heroin, God forbid. Obviously, my past decision a year ago to start shooting heroin shapes the present, right? But in doing that, you've essentially locked in the future, right? At least to an extent. Because now what am I going to do? Unless I quit my addiction, which is way easier said than done, I'm essentially confined myself to a future of begging, of maybe even potential prostitution, stealing, all these terrible things. So the past is not, you cannot conceive of a past not littered by wastage. You cannot conceive of a past not shaped by, or at least events that happened in the past did not shape the world we see today. And the same thing with the future. The future is not just this blank space to be filled. No, to a certain extent, it's set based on your past and present actions. Let's see. I'm just reading through my margins here. Okay. We have to think of them as forever bailing, setting and hauling while the northeast lowers over shallow banks unchanging and erosionless, or drawing their money, drying sails at dockage, not as making a trip that will be unpayable for a haul that will not bear examination. I'll be honest, I kind of struggle with this stanza, so maybe you guys can help me out with that one. There is no end of it, the voiceless wailing, no end to the withering of withered flowers, which is to say there is no end to rational time. The movement of pain that is pain and motionless, to the drift of the sea and the drifting wreckage. So if you're in the ship and you're drifting in the sea, you're engaging in the external world in eternity. Eventually that ship is gonna sink, but hey, the sea just keeps on rocking, keeps on waving. It's very interesting, by the way, when he says no end to the withering of withered flowers, to the movement of pain that is painless and motionless. So I think it's very interesting that Eliot is connecting motion with time, and he's also connecting a lack of motion, static stillness, with negative qualities, because of course anything that is in motion must unfold according to some sort of particular time sequence. It could be a cycle, it could be linear time, it could be immediacy, whatever it is. But the point is motion is essential, and I think it's very, very based and very integral and irrational to associate a lack of motion with negative qualities. And we see that, of course, in life. What happens when you die? I've been to enough funerals to know, hey, there's no motion here. And if there is any motion, it's only because I picked up the body and moved it. Oh, pretty cool. Let's see. To the drift of the sea and the drifting wreckage. The bone's prayer to death, it's God. Only the hardly, barely prayerable prayer of the one Annunciation. And I believe the Annunciation, is a reference to death. Okay, so now we're going to skip ahead a little bit. This is some really cool stuff. It seems, as one becomes older, that the past has another pattern and ceases to be a mere sequence. Let's try that again. It seems, as one grows older, that the past has another pattern and ceases to be a mere sequence. Do you remember at the beginning of this video when I talked about 922, then 923, 924? It's a very sequential, linear, causally focused understanding of time. And Eliot is saying, as one becomes older, which itself is important, because he's drawing a qualitative distinction between old and young. He's saying that this understanding of time could not have been unlocked by a young man. Happened to be by older, so we have even more time freedom. But as one becomes older, this understanding of time changes. And I think it makes sense because you're probably ruminating on your death. Or even development, the latter a partial fallacy encouraged by superficial notions of evolution, which becomes in the popular mind a means of disowning the past. It can be a little difficult to think what he means by that. Because you could argue that evolution is actually an acknowledgement of how the past shapes the present. I don't see how you could argue otherwise. I mean, is it not? Yeah, we all came from monkeys or whatever. Like, that is the past shaping the present. But apparently there are some rationalists or scientists who use evolution as a means of disowning the past. It could be interesting to think that, now that I think about it, maybe he's saying that the strictly rational and measurable and consciously known scientific aspect of evolution, it ignores or negates or shoves down all other cultural and phenomenological and consciousness structure stuff. So yes, evolution can give you this sort of strict linear, here's how we got here, but it can't account for the magical consciousness structure. It can't account for particular rituals and particular rites. If you really want to understand where those come from, you don't need the rational evolution, you need irrational phenomenology. And that's what Gebser's doing. So maybe that's what he means. The moments of happiness, not the sense of well-being, fruition, fulfillment, security, or affection, or even a very good dinner, but the sudden illumination. So what he's saying, the moment of happiness, he's making very clear, we're not talking about this sort of earthly, terrestrial, I came home and my girlfriend had dinner cooked. That's nice, and that it does make me happy. But he's drawing a qualitative distinction between that and what he's talking about. He's talking about The sudden illumination. That sounds like some sort of spiritual or transparent clarity. We had the experience but missed the meaning. So we may have had these moments of transparent clarity, but we've missed their meaning. An approach to the meaning restores the experience in a different form, beyond any meaning we can assign to happiness. So it kind of reminds me of my little mini spiritual experience when I saw those horses come down. As I restore that experience in my consciousness, Eliot is suggesting that I have transformed that experience. And now here comes the kicker. I have said before that the past experience revived in the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but of many generations. So when I do that, when I reconstruct or remember that original primordial spiritual experience, what I'm doing is I'm transforming it, and in doing so, connecting to previous generations. So in doing that, I've connected with the quote-unquote timeless, as Eliot would say, but really it's time freedom. Probably because this is what other people did when they had spiritual connections. Or it could be the spiritual experience is the experience of all. It is the experience of the totality of the universe, whether it's measurable, known, or otherwise. So in that sense, in restoring it in your consciousness, you are connecting to spirit. Not forgetting something that is probably ineffable. Actually, hold on. Let me read my marks here. Times equality. Okay, yeah. Not forgetting something that is probably quite ineffable. The backward look behind the assurance of recorded history. Of recorded history. The backward half look over the shoulder toward the primitive terror. Very important. So we're looking backwards behind the assurance of recorded history. That should be a dead giveaway if you follow my gift. So that's a dead giveaway. That's a reference to mental, rational, linear time. Remember in the first section of this video, we're looking back behind that so we can find the primordial time that emerged from the quote-unquote groundswell that he talks about. What he's really gesturing at. If you follow my Gev series, you should know what he's gesturing at. He's gesturing at time freedom that occurred quote-unquote before the other forms of time were understood by human beings. And recorded history, the measurable, the known, the recorded, there you go. Now we come to, this is very good. Now we come to discover that the moments of agony are likewise permanent. So we had the moments of happiness that we talked about, the sudden illumination. That's an aspect of the human condition. That's a permanent aspect of time. But in addition to this, now we have to come to discover that moments of agony are likewise permanent. Hello, Gebser fans. This is, in my opinion, a representation or expression of the permanence of the yin and yang, which is, say, the permanence of the life pole of the soul and the death pole of the soul. You have moments of happiness, but you have moments of agony. You have moments of joy, you have moments of failure, you have moments of life, you have moments of death. The soul can only grow through cycling through these two poles, through moments of happiness and agony. And I think this is a reference to say, look, the 2D mythical flat circle, that is a layer of the world that must be respected, and more specifically, it's a layer of our soul. So what the rationalists do, of course, what do you think they do? They take the life pole, they take the death pole, and instead of viewing them as complements, they view them as antitheses. So therefore, one is privilege over the other, and obviously it's always going to be life over death. The problem is we've already experienced death and life and death when you experience the death of others. In many ways, their death fuels your life insofar as it shapes you into who you are, and their death is only significant insofar as you observe these people in life. Life and death and life. And I think that's beautifully gestured out when he says moments of happiness and moments of agony are likewise permanent, just as the soul is permanently constituted by the death pole and the life pole. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Now listen to this. This is beautiful. With such permanence as time has, we appreciate this better in the agony of others nearly experienced involving ourselves than in our own. For our own past is covered by the currents of action, but the torment of others remains an experience unqualified, unworn by subsequent attrition. People change and smile, but the agony abides. Time the destroyer is time the preserver. What a beautiful, what an incredibly I find that to be so powerful. First of all, This is an amazing insight into the human condition here. This idea that we understand the agony, the moments of agony in others better than we do ourselves, because our own past is covered by the currents of action. But the torment of others remains an experience unqualified, unworn by subsequent attrition. So what he's saying, let me give you an example of what he's saying. I was out taking the trash out the other day, or I was coming home from work, and my neighbors, they have like a 7, 8-year-olds, cute kids. And they were coming home, and I heard this little boy scream. He was so angry, and he was so rageful and primally just angry. And it hit something in my soul. I still think about it to this day. It just hit me. I just felt, damn. And it was beyond just feeling bad for someone. It was beyond just, oh, you got to stay an extra hour at work and I feel bad. It felt like it hit me in my soul. And I just thought, Jesus Christ, man. It was powerful. It was resonant. So what did I do, of course? I thought, okay, well, let's think about this. I probably felt that way because I experienced that. And 2, well, he's just a kid. He doesn't know any better. Kids, this is what kids do. And he'll forget about it. These are just moments of whatever. What's happening is what Eliot is describing beautifully here. He's saying the torment that the kid experienced is being qualified or covered by currents of action, which is a fancy poetic way of saying I'm essentially rationalizing this original experience and trying to soften the edges, and in doing so make it more palatable for me to live. The problem is that initial experience of that little boy's scream, it really was, the torment of that little boy was an experience unqualified and unworn by subsequent action of attrition. So when I had that experience as a kid, and that's why it probably resonated for me so much, I had all these excuses. No, I just had a moment of weakness. That's not me, that was just a moment. I was a kid back then. I don't act that way now. What's happening is the original experience is being covered by currents of action, layers of rationalizations, and as time progresses, I move away from that original experience, and I've almost transformed its nature into something else entirely. People change and smile, but the agony abides. So I think what he's saying is when you see the moments of agony and torment in others, it affects your soul so deeply that, again, it's unqualified, it's unworn. So when you see them in different contexts, you're going to retain that view because it's unqualified. You qualify your own moments of agony to make yourself feel better. That's nice, but the unqualified, unworn experience of others is how you understand yourself. So paradoxically, if you really want to understand yourself better, you look at others. You don't look inside, you look at others. Why would you not look inside? Because when you look inside, all you're looking at is those currents of action, those layers of rationalizations that have transformed that original experience. But the experience of the little boy screaming, that was unqualified, that was direct. That was injected into my veins, streamlined. There was no medium there. So, seeing that in them, that breaks the illusion of, oh, I'm this, rational, perfect guy, and that was just, I don't do that. No, you did do that, and that's why it affected you, which leads us to our next amazing line. Time the destroyer is time the preserver. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful line. So essentially the idea being expressed is time both kills, erodes, and decays, but it also preserves past and future simultaneously. Let's take the example I just gave. The moment of agony, the experience of torment, I had that, let's say, when I was 6 years old. Right, but I'm 29 now. So as time has gone on, time has destroyed, which is to say time has decayed, blunted, and eroded that original experience. How does it do that? Well, I just covered it. Oh, I was just a kid. That's what kids do. All these rationalizations. Great. So time is the destroyer. It destroyed that original experience. Great. But time is also the preserver, right? So in destroying the original experience, what it does, is it preserved its primordial effect. And that is nowhere more evident than this example. If time truly was only a destroyer, then I wouldn't have related to that kid's moment of agony at all, because there would have been no experience like that preserved in my soul. But time is a preserver as well. So it preserved the primordial effect of that experience while destroying my sort of conscious mental understanding of it. And that is why The experience was so impactful for me, and it made me a more empathetic person because I realized, like, hold on now, like, I've been there. Like, it just affected me, and I just thought, let's be a little more forgiving here, okay? Because I don't want to hear that scream again, and that was bad. I did not like that at all, and that could only have happened with time destroying and time preserving. There you go. I think it is a beautiful thing. You can always think of time as time the destroyer is time the preserver. It's absolutely beautiful. You could also think this idea with death, right? Time obviously decays and erodes people until they die, right? But if your mom dies, that's time the destroyer. But time the preserver preserves her effect on you in your soul. And then as the time unfolds in life, you have that preservation that you can draw from. It's beautiful. So that's a common, that's a little pithy little line that we're going to memorize on this channel. Time the destroyer is time the preserver. And I think it's a beautiful, just insightful look into the human condition. If you want to understand yourself, understand others. If you want to understand yourself, look at the unqualified, unworn actions of others and recognize that's the exact experience you had, but you've now reinterpreted it after the fact to satiate your ego and to say, oh, I'm actually not that bad of a person. Okay. Okay. So time the destroyer is time the preserver. Like the river with its cargo of dead Negroes, cows, and chicken coops. The bitter apple and the bite in the apple. So the time the preserver and destroyer is evidence in this river idea, I think. The dead Negroes, obviously that's time the destroyer, decaying and eroding. And then the cows and chicken coops. These are living animals that are being preserved by the river and the ship on the river. There you go. The bitter apple and the bite in the apple. Whew. And this is interesting. And the ragged rock and the restless waters, waves wash over it, fogs conceal it. On a halcyon day, it is merely a monument. In navigable weather, it is always a sea mark. So we have a rock in the middle of this river. So on one day, it is merely a monument. And another day, in navigable weather, in a different day, in different experiences, it is always a sea mark to lay course by. This is very interesting. I think this is a reference to aperspectivity. One day, my computer that I'm recording from is a computer. The other day, it's a symbol for modernity. And here's where it gets interesting. He says to lay a course by. But in the somber season or the sudden fury is what it always was. So was the object, was my computer a computer, or was it a symbol for modernity? It was both. On the day that you perceived it as a computer, it was a computer. On the day that you perceived it as a symbol, it was a symbol. This is aperspectivity, not taking a singular perspective and taking it for the whole. This is also time, integral consciousness. Spatial perspectives, whether it's a computer, whether it's a symbol, is informed by time. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I think it's a gesturing at the aperspective whole, this idea that you can view the computer as a computer or the symbol, either one or the other, or simultaneously both. And it is what it always was. I think it's brilliant because phenomenologically it makes sense. When I'm playing with my nephews and we have like the washer, well, on that day the washer wasn't the washer, was it? The washer was home base that the kids could run to, and I can't touch them and get them out because that's the whole point of home base. It's not that the washer wasn't that. It's just that the washer today is a washer and the washer then was the home base. So that is beautifully expressed. It is what it always was. And I think it's beautiful. I think it cuts right to the heart of the human condition. I think this poem is freaking awesome. Let me check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Recorded history, again, past, future, present. Yep. Okay, so next video, I don't know when that'll be. We'll go through section 3. We'll probably do section 3 and 4, because section 4 is very short. But hopefully that was insightful. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I would love if you continue the series because we're getting about halfway done. It's a limited series, and I'm having a blast reading it and making it. I love you guys. Please let me know if this has affected you, if this has inspired some sort of insight or whatever. It would make my heart just soar if you guys could let me know. I love you guys. I will see you soon, and thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it.